So, knowledge of certain formulas. We are guarding ourselves from drowning, being overcome by water, being engulfed by the water element. What actually happens if we do become engulfed by the water element? Why is that a disadvantage? Or is it?
You're buffeted about with emotion and...
Yeah, the emotional body just becomes out of control, I imagine, and dominates everything else.
Renders all plans futile, right? It's kind of hard to stick to what you intend if you're always being thrown off course by what you like and don't like. You know, I go for this, I run away from that. You can't hold the center, you can't achieve according to your intentions. We all know that people who can be overcome by emotion at any moment are not reliable.
They're not,
No. I mean, I think, you know, that in the dramatic arts, there's a place for it. There's a place for people who are so emotionally responsive that they are spontaneous and interesting in that way and can act out for us what we might not be able to demonstrate so easily. But even there has to be strict control with the mind to be a really good actor, really. You have to have both.
With people, can you, who are so emotional?
Yeah.
There's no reasoning.
Yes, it weakens you, and you know it prevents the love energy from actually working. In other words, desire and love are not the same thing. It can cover the sun. You see, it shuts out the sun. That was the word. Engulfs the swimmer, shuts out the sun, and renders all plans useless, futile. All right, so that's what it is to be overcome. And, you know, humanity today, the great majority of people, there's not so much emotional control. No, as a matter of fact, in these countries that are just... I keep on looking at some of these wars that are going on in Africa and in other places, and it really is emotional adherence to a fixed idea. There's not...
Tribal, of course.
That.
A lot of that is tribal.
And what is tribal except defending your own ego in terms of the family, right? A tribe is ego in a larger sense. And you have a huge emotional investment in it. And it is right and others are wrong. It's all based on attraction, repulsion, and there's no real broad understanding. Well, you know, people are where they are. That's the amazing thing. And you cannot expect that people will suddenly be able to jump to the mental, reasonable level. It's not going to happen overnight. So we have to, it's forces as they are apportioned all over the earth, and we have to deal with the forces as they are, without wishful thinking that suddenly they will become reasonable. Just like intuitive people looking upon rational people can say, well, they're not suddenly going to become intuitive. So any leader has a very tough problem at the moment, because there are masses of people who can be swayed by a demagogue without reason. All right, certain formulas. We're talking about certain formulas. These formulas are 3 in number. First, those which blend the 2 notes and add a third, and thus call into activity the builders of the astral plane, the Agni Suryas, in some one or other of their grades. So what are the 2 notes? The first note is the sound of the ego. These are based on the initiatory sound of the ego, and distinguish between it and the note of the builders and the tiny and lives of the tiny thought form already formed. Because the note is one thing, but the tiny thought form has its own note. There is the note of the man, the note of the soul, and the note of the tiny thought form. These are the 3 notes. The formula is chanted on the basis of these 3 notes, variation of tone and note, though not of formula, producing the types of forms. Whoa, it's very precise, isn't it? Very precise. Let's look at that again. Formulas which blend the 2 notes, the man and the ego, and add a third, and thus call into activity the builders of the astral plane, the Agnisurians. So the third note apparently is related to the Agnisurians, blending all notes involved in creation. The third note appears to be related to certain types of astral builders or Agnisurians. In some one or other of their grades. I suppose according to the note, so is the grade of Agnisurian. These formulas, I suppose, are based on the initiatory sound of the ego, which starts the magical process going, and distinguish between it and the sound of the note of the builders and of the tiny thought form already formed. The formula is chanted on the basis of these three notes, variation of tone and note, though not a formula producing types of forms. So here's the question. Are these three notes? What are these three notes? Let's see if we can see what they are. What are they exactly? And I have two thoughts. One is the ego, the man, and the Agnisurians. That's one way of looking at it. The other is the ego, the Agnisurians, and the thoughtful itself. Which is it?
I think it's the top one, the man, and the Agnisurian.
Maybe it will tell us a little bit later, because it says, then shall the second sound go forth. So we studied yesterday that the man on his own plane sends forth a second sound to reinforce the creation that he is making on the mental plane. The solar angel determined the nature of the creation, more or less. The man picked up the vibration and is meditating with the solar angel, and then sends his own sacred word forth to reinforce the quality. But the little creation itself, with the notes of all the builders involved, has its own note. We know that the thought form has its own note. The question is, are the Agnisurians involved part of that note? I think so. Anyway, these are technicalities. Okay. And then I got into some discussion about the tonic, subdominant, and dominant, but that's not so utterly important. All right, there are three formulas. So the first one is a formula based on three notes. The second is a formula of insulation. Those which are of a purely protective nature. What was the purpose of the first formula? You said they were based on the initiatory sound of the ego. I suppose the purpose of this first formula is to blend and harmonize the notes, I think. The purpose of the first formula to blend and harmonize the notes. And, why do that? Why blend and harmonize the note of the ego, the man, and the thoughtful? Why do that? Why do that? What do you think? What happens if the man is out of tune with the ego?
Nothing really happens.
Well, or if it does, it won't be what the ego intended, will it? Right. And what happens if the man has good intentions, but somehow is creating something on the mental plane which does not fulfill his good intentions because he doesn't have the skill or ability to do that? Then what do you have? You have what's to be done by the ego, the good intentions of the man who is unskillful, and a thought form which does not reflect the intention of the ego or the man. That can happen too, right? In other words, you've seen this a lot of times. People want to create something good, but they just don't have the ability to do it. You've seen that. But if we have the harmonization of all of those notes, then we will have right creation. Man is the instrument of the ego, right? And the thought form is what? The product of the creative act. Like, for instance, when you receive from the ego an intention, are you necessarily capable of reproducing that intention as a creation? Not necessarily. Suppose, okay, I'll give you an example. Suppose you're a student of piano. You go and you hear a master pianist. You're all inspired. You are a pianist, and you say, okay, now I want to reproduce that somehow. Where you have good intentions and you actually took in what it was, but
Doesn't sound the same.
your instrument isn't ready yet. See? Or you say, that composer, wow, that's fantastic. I'm inspired, now I want to compose. And you find out that your capability, even with the best of intentions, is not equal to mirroring the inspirational impulse. So what does this tell us that we have to do as human instruments on the physical plane? Really shape up. Which is Vulcan? Mercury? Mercury is skill, Vulcan is strength. Vulcan is training. Saturn too. In other words, train the instrument to reflect the intention of the solar angel or the inspiring source. Learn how to type. The instrument knows the words, but the fingers won't produce it. The product lacks. Okay. Well, I guess how much training is going to be required of us? Training, pattern, repetition, routining, until you can just... Suppose you're a member of a commando unit, and you have this military mission, and you don't know how to put your rifle together in the dark. You know how they do? They practice. So everything goes together. But you don't know how to do that. You have good intentions, and you're off on a mission, and you can't do that. So we have a lot of training that, required of us. I think if we really knew how hard it was all at once, few there would be among us who would make the effort. We are allowed incrementally to realize the demand. You come to the master and say, okay, master, I'm ready. Look, I've done this. Well, there's one more thing you might want to try. Then you do it, and you come back, well, I did it. Well, there's one more thing. And you're led by these one more things up that steep mountain road until you discover how far you've really gone, being lured on by one more requirement at a time. In other words, we're only allowed, in a way, to see a couple of steps ahead, that's all. Because if we were to see too far ahead, given the usual human psyche, we know what would happen. We'd quit. Discouragement. We'd sit down at the side of the road and have a picnic or die or cry or whatever, instead of to keep going. So, it's a bit like the man, would you rather have incremental karma or karma all at once? What would you prefer?
Incremental.
Would you like incremental? You remember I told you the story about the companion of Blavatsky called T. Subba Roy, a very high Brahmin, the equal of Blavatsky in initiatory rank. He asked his master to give him his karma all at once, and he got it. If you want to read about it, you can. It's not a pretty story, but some horrible disease. He got some horrible disease, and he died. But
or something, wasn't it?
what is it?
Yeah, but didn't it come up in big lumps?
Yes, he had those horrible horrible growths. Imagine all the unresolved chaotic energy working out in your system as these Hodgkin's kind of thing and all that. Would you rather have it incrementally or all at once?
Incremental on the top.
Incremental or not at all, thanks. Well, it's a big question. You can be sure that after a horrible experience, you'd feel a whole lot better, wouldn't you? While you're watching all of those people year after year go through incremental doses of their own poison. I'm still thinking about
You
it.
first.
I wonder, your joke in the Bible.
Job, yeah.
If he asked him to get it all in at the same time.
Was Job another one? Aha.
Yeah.
And then what hhappened? Everything, right?
Everything that
Could go wrong
He
happened.
got the full impact.
Well, it does give you pause, doesn't it? Because the whole idea of getting what you ask for and so forth. I suppose if you do address your soul or the master and say, okay, I'm ready, let it happen, I suppose it will happen. Well, we'll deal with that later.
That's the relief.
Yes, that's the requirement of this course. Okay, next there's a formula of insulation. Those which are of purely protective nature and which, through a knowledge of the laws of sound as they are known in connection with water, place a vacuum between the magician and the waters. These are the air atoms that I was talking about. And I think there might be some kind of Buddhic involvement in this, as well as between him and his creation, because we don't want that creation to come back and find a home in our aura. You know what I mean? I suppose many of us have had the experience where maybe we have children and we send them out into the world. But do you know they manage to come back? It's okay, it's okay if they don't come back forever. You know what I mean? Because it's hard on them psychologically and it's hard on the parent. When you send forth your creation, you hope it's strong enough to manage on its own, really. That doesn't mean you're not compassionate, because it's a very tough world. I think of what it meant for me to make a living when I was a young person, and what it means for young people to go out and try to make a living now. It's much harder economic situation. So it does bring people maybe back to the nuclear family and so forth. But you know what I mean? It can become an unhealthy relationship, because both parties feel they've failed. And that brews up an unhappy interaction. So you don't want your thought form coming back and finding a home within you, within your aura, or it will drain you, as we will learn here. Okay.
This protection, I think about the moon. The moon.
Right.
But there is in esoteric astrology, when the decay tells about Cancer, the sign of Cancer is giving hints about the moon as a protector.
As the protector. Well, the moon per se, maybe that which the moon symbolizes, perhaps. He does tell us, or Blavatsky tells us about the moon per se, that it has a poisonous effect on the earth at the present time. And that we don't want to go back there, nor do we want to go back to what the moon symbolizes in our chart generally. But of course, the moon is also the symbol of each one of the lunar vehicles, Uranus, Neptune, and Vulcan. And from that point of view, it is something that has to be transformed and is useful and so forth, our habit nature. But the moon per se, right now, he says it's just a body in space, right? Yeah. And it vampirizes its child, the earth. Interesting. Anyway, a vacuum is placed, and look, it's not just a question of knowing the laws of sound, it's knowing the laws of which sounds are to be used in relation to the water element. So you see how much technical information is missing here, but just enough to make us patient. Because people who don't know about this will perhaps think that they can just go ahead with various false words and other confusing methods. So anyway, here's a protective mantra. The formula is based on the sounds connected with air as well. For it is through the placing around himself of a protecting shell of air atoms, esoterically understood, that the magician guards himself from the approach of the water builders. Now, when I see the word esoteric, I'm very alert, because it usually means a very high thing. For instance, I'm going to point out to you a page here in esoteric psychology where the term esoteric is used. And it's right here. He tells us about the rays of Uranus, Saturn, and Neptune. And here's what he says. Esoterically speaking, the planets which are the expression of the three major rays are ray 1, Uranus, ray 2, Neptune, ray 3, Saturn. Esoterically speaking. Now we already know the soul rays of those planets, so he's not going down farther and telling us about a lower ray, he's telling us about a higher ray. So in this particular case, the word esoteric means the monadic ray. And oftentimes the word points in that direction. There are a few other examples of this where esoteric points to the word monad, or at least some high spiritual factor. So when we come back here and he says, for it is through the placing around him of a protective shell of air atoms, esoterically understood, it's probably Buddhic atoms. This is what strikes me. And that somehow it is like the idea of the love or the harmonizing energy of the Buddhic plane, which is protecting the Creator. Now, look, I could be wrong about this, but the hints for me are pointing in the right direction. I don't know where else we're going to get air atoms, what they would mean. I don't think they're mental atoms. I think they have some sort of, when you can touch the soul is full of Buddhic energy. Solar fire is full of Buddhic energy. And I think that's what's being used here by the soul-aligned white magician. Now, maybe there's another definition here, I don't know, but that's what occurs to me first. Do you have, yes?
Air is life.
The air is life. The air is life. It's the first level of the cosmic ethers, the living area of the cosmic physical plane. The air is life. We were studying Formula 1 in the Moria Federation, it's I'll point to what Lona was indicating here. It goes like this: deep in the tree, between the roots and flowers, the eye again is seen. The eye that knows, the eye that sees, the directing eye. One made of fire, that's the monad. One fluid as the sea, that's the soul. And two which look from here to there, that's the realm of duality or the personality. It's the disciple and the personality, actually. Fire, water, and the earth all need the vital air. The air is life. The air is God. So that's esoteric air. Esoteric air. So, now here's what I'm not sure about. Probably a black magician or a strictly mental magician can also protect himself from water elementals. Probably, I would think. But he does not contact the Buddhic plane. And he does not contact the love energy of the soul. He is not using solar fire. How does he do it then? Well, these are the technicalities of the science of magic for the future decades and centuries. And if we're careful in our preparation, the day will come when we can be magical scientists and know exactly what we're doing. So, This formula is based on sounds connected with air as well, for it is through the placing around himself of a protecting shell of air atoms, esoterically understood, that the magician guards himself from the approach of the water builders. Now, it can't be just atmospheric air, because how could you use them to protect anything on the astral plane? You couldn't, So it's got to be more subtle than that. Anyway, suffice it to say, there are protective mantrams, and we'll get into how they can be given to us, whether by the master, by the soul, or by the recovery of our memory. All right.
What comes to mind for me is
Yes.
the breathe on me breath of God.
Right.
It has that same connotation, doesn't it?
Yes.
It's protection.
Yes. Of course, and also remember that the breathing exercises relate to prana. So breath and prana go together. Air, breath, and prana. And they are called... So actually, you bring up an important point. So let us put it down. Let us not forget the vital airs and how they could be involved in the protective process. Yet, the protection must involve the astral plane, and the vital airs are etheric. So, there are puzzles here for us, but if we hold the problem in our mind, then the solution can come, even though it doesn't come immediately. Here's a third. Okay, so what do we have so far? A formula which blends 3 notes. It harmonizes everything so that the thought form really does harmoniously reflect the intention. Then we have protective formulas. Who's being protected? The magician is being protected from the waters and also from his own creation. Is it possible to create a creation which will return to haunt you? Know what I mean? Matter of fact, that is the way it is, You just can't get rid of your creations. Somehow they are connected to you. Unless you know, and even if you know how to snap the link and you send that creation out in the world, it will return to sender if it is selfish. He tells us about this, because there's a negative vortex which pulls it back. Whereas if it's a selfless creation, it goes out and takes part in the larger whole. But a selfish creation returns to sender. So that's pretty good about, what does that warn us about our words and our thoughts, right? In this area here, in White Magic, on page 475, he says, here's the word of hate. These are words. The cruel speech which ruins those who feels its spell, the poisonous gossip passed along because it gives the thrill. These words kill the flickering impulses of the soul, cut at the roots of life, and so bring death. If spoken in the light of day, just retribution will they bring. When spoken and then registered as lies, they strengthen the illusory world in which the speaker lives and hold him back from liberation. And here it is, this one. If uttered with intent to hurt, to bruise, and kill, they wander back to him who sent them forth, and him they bruise and kill. So it's the boomerang effect of our selfish, cruel creations. And sometimes, when somebody does something to us, it's just our own energy that we sent forth at an earlier time, returning to us by the instrument who has been affected by what we sent forth. So there's an incredible ethical balance in our cosmos.
So that person becomes an instrument of your own karma.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Of course, that person may have been susceptible to it, because a truly good person wouldn't necessarily be victimized by the hateful thoughts that you sent forth. It's someone who resonates to it. But in the last analysis, we do get what we deserve. And this law of justice really is operative. And where people make the mistake is they say, I want revenge. This person has wronged me. I want to see them get their just deserts now. But then the old saying is, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. So in other words, it's the big system which takes care of justice. And if you try to take justice into your own hands, you're acting like an Aries in a Libran system. And it just doesn't work. Then you are prosecuted for that very thing.
But it also works the other way around.
Yes?
I mean, the good you send out will come back.
Exactly. That is also true. And it comes back having helped the whole system. And you are but sometimes they say, watch out for your good karma, because it can bind you as securely as bad karma. You know what I'm saying? In other words, suddenly good fortune happens to you, and you find out that in a way it can also enslave you. Now I know that sounds unlikely.
Stops you striving.
Yeah, it can
Stop you striving.
Yeah, it can do that, or it can encumber you. Now, for instance, we're told that a master is often handicapped by the devotion of his students. In other words, they mean nothing but good, apparently. But all of these, as a matter of fact, the master in the ashram has to be protected from the devotional waves of his students, and there's someone assigned to ward them off. So I think it's very interesting that excessive good can be as dangerous as bad. Maybe you even learn more from the bad. So again, the noble middle path, which is disidentified with both the material good and the material bad, is said to be the path for us to choose. Like I say, and I talked about it yesterday, a person who has everything in life may become encumbered, fettered, bound by all those apparently good things around them. Okay, but the law of return is true, and that's why Christ said a very interesting thing, right? It's better to give than to receive, because giving is receiving when you give what is good. All right, let's go on. The third formula. Third, those which when sounded produce two results: the sending forth of the perfected creation. Now that means later, after all of the different sheaths are added, so that it may take to itself a physical body. So let's just say it is perfected before it has a physical body. So meaning perfection is reached. Perfection is physical, perfection is mental, emotional, and etheric. And then the physical body is just an automatic aggregation of dense physical atoms around a perfected form. Remember we said, what if we treated our etheric body as if it was the real physical body? So there's formulas for sending forth of the... In other words, we oftentimes think, now it's perfect because it has a physical form. But we can say, now it's perfect because it has the right etheric form. And the rest becomes automatic once magic is known and understood. Now we're not there yet. So we can have something very good etherically, but we still have to, with our hands and our feet, we still have to build it. We have to build it. The true magician won't have to do that. The true magician just sends it forth. It will build itself, or build itself through others. And next, this formula disperses the building forces, now that their work is complete. If you don't disperse the building forces, you are also in trouble, because they need to be sent back to where they came from. Okay, so here are the three formulas. The formula is based on three notes of the ego, the devas, and the thought form itself, or ego, man, and thought form, plus devas. There's protective formulas which insulate you, and there's the formulas for sending forth to the physical plane and for dispersing astral forces. The last set of formulas, the one that sends it forth and disperses, you know, in magic there's something called a banishing ritual, isn't there? In other words, whatever you gather, you have to send back to where it came, right? You might call it the law of restitution, the law of giving back, right? Okay. If it aggregates, it deaggregates. Okay. The last set of formulas is exceedingly interesting, and were they not so powerful, the magician might find himself cumbered, obstructed, with the produce of his thought and the prey of a vital form and of certain devas of the waters who would never leave him until they had completely drained from him all the waters of his nature, absorbing it into their own nature and producing his astral death. Then DK, he tells us he's known a few to whom this has happened. Well, a lot of experimentation lies ahead. And he says that in discovering what the Deva kingdom is, man will